Hello, how is you here? And I've got a play and explain of a recent seat at the Triumvirate 21 we did. Um, as with a lot of keys that have start basically action off the bat, what we'll be doing is starting the key with a Light's Potential potion, full stacks of Wheel and Woe, trying to proc our Master of the Darkness and send it as soon as the key has started, uh, to try and have as much ramp as possible. We're going into this pack. Unfortunately, I sent a dome on a ceiling I didn't realize was a ceiling, so we got a waste of that cooldown. But we do still have evangelism, and we still have some pain suppressions, so we've got a lot of throughput. Our pot would only just be running out. If we need to, we could send a second light's potential, but I feel like at this particular point in the fight, we've kind of gotten rid of anything that's going to really one shot us short of making a mistake. So, it's a big pack. You'd love to have Shadow Wear Pain spread on everyone there, but unfortunately, you have to use your opponents quite defensively rather than offensively, which means that you don't have as much healing from Atonement as a result. But what I like to do on these pulls is getting myself one of the subjugators focused. I like to see who they're casting chains on, and sorry, I like to see when they're casting chains and who they're casting the Leeching Void on. I like to try and be proactive by pre-casting onto the person that gets cast the Leeching Void. However, you know, having the instant flash heal procced as a Shadow Mend is going to be the game changer on these pulls. Um, so what we're doing here is because this second pool we're kind of dry. We've got the Void guy that's rotting everyone down. You're just trying to send as much throughput with as little tools as you've got as possible. You know, trying to keep Shadow Wear Pain up. You will notice there will be times that I don't have it up 100% of the time on 100% of the mobs. It's never as easy as that. Unfortunately, we do overlap a Pains Up and a Bark Skin here as he's gathering the next. What I like to do is have one Pains Up ready for when the boss is pulled, because sometimes the tank doesn't have the defensive for the tank buster. Again, just pug life. You want to try and prepare for you want to be ready for the worst rather than prepare for the perfect run, because you're not going to get the perfect run often enough. Um, I like to have a spare paints up for if some of these charges go off, and as a disc priest on this particular boss, like how you succeed, like how you perform better is making sure that your mind control is on cooldown as soon as possible. It will let you have control of the ads as quickly as possible by getting the next mind control ready quicker, sooner. Now, as a disc priest, as a disc priest main, you know, don't let other people that don't play your class tell you how to play it. I'm sure they've seen videos or they've seen other priests telling you that you can shackle and take control of all the mobs, but everyone has something here that can control the mobs that doesn't require you spending points in your talent tree that basically ruin you for the rest of the key. I prefer having fear. I feel like fear is the only point that I could spare if I wanted to go into shackle, and I think fear is just nicer. It's a CC that doesn't break instantly, whereas shackle, if someone spread a dot onto one of these ads, the shackle's useless. Um, as well as like later in the key, you're able to use fear as a stop on some of the casts that happen on some of the trashier packs. And one of the things that does happen, unfortunately, is tanks don't have aggro at the start of the pull all the time. And if you've got mobs running at you and you don't have fade, or you need fade for something else like the subjugators, for example, you're gonna die. Where fear might be that savior. And again, fear does have uses. You can use it on these ads to control them. Sure, it's not the shackle that keeps them in Narnia, but you still you still can. But here's a little trick as well. If you want, you can grip the blob that you've mind controlled into the ads just to alleviate the whole running around the room trying to get the ad onto the boss. But yeah, as a disc priest, like your main thing obviously is controlling the ads and keeping some pre-ramped shields on anyone that gets targeted by the leap. There's two bits of damage that will happen. That'll be one when the voids spawn, and two here where he does crashing void. You want to be, again, as often as always, you want to be pre-ramping with shields on as many people as possible. You want to try and make sure you've got atonement for the damage reduction on people and the increased healing. And anyone that doesn't have atonement on them, you want to be fixing that with some spot heals as quickly as possible. Um, Something that you can use from this key as well, you'll notice that when he does do that AoE group damage, he knocks you back. A good habit to get into with Disc Priest is make sure you're casting penance for the knockback so that you're not actually interrupted on any healing spells. Because if you're, hard casting a flash heal, for example, then not only do you not get any healing off, but you've lost all that time that you were casting for it to be interrupted. Now we go into this next pack with the little trash bits that we've picked up from the previous room. We're going to be sending our Shadow Word Pain and spreading it with penances as early on as possible. Not only, does that give us our atonement healing, but it will give us, our We and Almost stacks. Here, if you were in communication with your augmentation evoker, I like to ask them to only cauterize Dispel the Bleed on this overlap that's happening by the Rift Warden. As a result, because we don't have that communication, you'll notice I did have to send a Pain Sup on our Demon Hunter, but it's not that big of a deal because we've got two stacks of Pain Sup and we can farm it back quickly. Another thing, you know, don't let people don't let people tell you you're wasting your suppression. If it alleviates or removes the need to heal one particular person or two particular people in the group because it makes them super tanky, then it alleviates pressure, which stops you from falling behind. And Disc's weakness right now is its inability to catch up, but its strengths are in it being ahead of tempo. So don't, as a pug healer and as someone that's watching this that might not be a Disc priest or might be a DPS or tank player, you know, Disc's strength comes from being ahead of the damage, not catching up. So sometimes you may see that we send a pain suppression and it looks a little bit YOLO, but it's what keeps us from like A going B like people dropping low. Like, I'll have a lot of people comment after keys that I've been in that, it felt super safe. Everyone was like topped up or like had big shields on them quite frequently, and that's because we're playing in such a way that keeps us proactive rather than reactive. Now, here again, you'll notice, we know which way we're going in the dungeon. You should know when you're doing keys up to like 21s which way you're going next. So try and put yourself in between the pack that you're killing and the next pack that you're pulling so that you can try and get a decent drink off. Um, it's no surprise, it's no secret that Disc Priests suffer from mana issues. So having yourself in a position where you can get some decent combat breaks to get a decent drink off, whether it's even just one sip or a full reset, is going to benefit you. Now this pull here, you're going to get like your two magic debuffs go out. You want to try and dispel them as quickly as possible to stop the AoE shadow damage doing as much damage as it does. You'll be pre-ramping with our evangelism. We've got our 18% plus healing from it. And we're trying to get some like pretty decent shields to out heal this damage. Unfortunately, again, another mistake that's made, which is partly a reason why I chose this key to comment on, is the DK sends his AMZ here kind of like at a point where it doesn't change. Like here, he sent it on this pulsing bit of AoE that is just very easy to out heal, and then it doesn't happen for the Rift Warden's next sort of like big bit of AoE. But fortunately, it dies before that happens. But as someone that's watching this, perhaps that isn't a healer, I really implore you to understand a bit more the damage profiles. If you've got such a powerful defensive tool like AMZ or Zephyr or Darkness or something like that, just sending it for the sake of it being on cooldown often is more detrimental because it's a tool that could have been much better utilized to keep the tempo of the key um, in a positive direction. Now you notice that we are behind, not behind, we're ahead of our Bloodlust timing. This pack is normally pulled into the Rift Warden with Bloodlust and cooldowns. but we're pulling it, 15, 20 seconds too soon. But hey, it is what it is. It doesn't change how our approach of this pull is. We're POing the DK because it's a bigger pull. He should have cooldowns, but it could have been equally as useful on the Demon Hunter because he has meta. We're starting with Fade. We've got our barrier down. We've now just got our Bloodlust sent. Um, unfortunately, we don't have potion, so we don't have power potion, but we've got enough of everything else that this stuff dies anyway. It would have just been overkill to have used pot on this pool. Um, you'll notice here as well, I do pre-Desperate Prayer. Again, it's just about being proactive. You don't want to fall behind. Having that on yourself makes you obviously a little bit more tanky, which means you can focus on someone else. I think it's important to not waste your Dwarf Dispel if you're playing Dwarf on the magic debuff here because it is so much more valuable on the bleed overlap than it is on dispelling the magic debuff. But I know a lot of people don't play Dwarf. I highly recommend it. Now, here's another mistake that happens. The Druid forgets that he's not playing with a monk and continues to pull in such a way that doesn't allow us for a mana break. Now, I'm not saying this particular pull is bad, but later on before the boss, unfortunately we don't get a mana break. You really want to be going into that pull with 100% mana or as close to it as possible. Now, you'll notice that we did get a bleed with the overlap of the Rift Warden, but I chose to Pain Suppression it rather than Dwarf, and that's because I felt like I could get a better use of Dwarf later, which happens here. I get to Dwarf off the bleed on still a double AoE duration, which I think was just a really good prevention of the overlap. And I feel like I had other things rolling that could have kept me alive um, that didn't warrant me using Dwarf at that particular point. But here, I try to ping the tank. I try to say like, assist ping. I try to pull him back, but he's already pulled. And I'm typing to him and say, look, I need to be going in this fight with more mana. We should have dropped combat. You can then have chained, but unfortunately we do waste sort of like 30, 45 seconds doing this whole song and dance for no reason. Um, you will as well. I don't know if I mentioned this already. Unfortunately, this is I think the third or fourth attempt of me trying to record this video, but had some interruptions. But the tank has put symbiotic relationship on us, which I think is a waste. I think priests are very tanky, and it would be much more valuable going on the augmentation. And the org also has given us stone, which means they don't have that spare point to talent into something more defensive. Um, Disc priests don't need stone in this dungeon. Uh, in fact, no one needs stone in this dungeon. Uh, I would explain why with like showing you why, but unfortunately we don't approach the part of the dungeon where people think you need to use it in this particular pool. Now here, you're going to get some overlaps. You're going to get the phase dash here, which is the removal of the orbs, and you're going to get overload. And the only thing that causes overlap is the bleed, really. Now Shadewing will be like dashing. No, it's not. Sorry, Darkfang dashing and like applying a bleed to people. Now, for the most part, you can just spot heal it because there's not other damage going on normally when that happens. However, if he does cast Overload or he is doing this particular phase dash right here, you want to be ready with a Pain Sup or some targeted spot heals. Or ultimately, that would be when the orc would um, use Cauterize. Now you notice here, unfortunately, my Shadow Mend proc ran out mid cast, which stopped me having a spot heal on the org as he had a bleed and was facing an overlap. Now this is a huge problem with disc priests. That I'm not sure if it's a bug. I'm not sure if it's as it's supposed to be intended, but it is super toxic, and that is if your Shadowmen proc runs out, you're casting Shadowmen proc as it runs out. It will just stop casting, even though you're still technically casting a flash heal, and you just won't cast anything. And even though it's happened to me all these times, I still stand in awe every time it happens. I'm just like, seriously, how is this something that is allowed to be a part of the game, especially on such a powerful part of the Disc Priest's kit, which is Shadow Mend? Like, I don't know. If there's one thing that I wish they could change right now, it's this whole like cancel casting when Shadow Mend proc runs out. But hey, rant over. Again, it's important to be spot healing on someone that gets the overlap. In this particular case, it was the Demon Hunter. We could have sent a Pain Sup, but I feel like Pain Sup is more valuable here when we get the overload and the bleed overlap on that particular case. Um, Again, just try to be proactive where possible. If you need to send a Desperate Prayer early, do so and use that as the ability to tank a little bit more damage. Maybe pair it with a health pot. Um, but yeah, this fight is really simple. I shouldn't really have to be explaining too much. Just tell your orgs to try to only dispel on overlap and save your dwarf as well for only an overlap. You've got evangelism, you've got barrier, you've got pain sups to deal with anything that sort of like doesn't line up well. Um, you know, obviously there's no RNG in this fight. Nothing randomly happens in this fight, but your teammates will make that RNG, unfortunately, when you're playing in a pug. So just making sure that you've got something at your disposal for when one of these inevitable situations happens is what's going to keep you from bricking keys in in pugs. Now here, I don't like how tanks do this in pugs at all. I want Path of Frost from the DK, but I don't even know if we get it. I think I've asked for it, but we don't get it. And then I'm stuck doing this. Oh, now we get it at the end, but I'm now like stuck doing this whole jump crap here, and we've got the targeted buster abilities, and then straight into a frontal. But we're all here in sort of like the water, jumping up and down. It's just horrible. I hate it. I think it could be done so much cleaner, but it is what it is. Yeah, we've got this particular pool, which is relatively easy. You do get some overlaps with the busters on top of the backstabs. So be ready to have a pain sup if that's the case, or in my case as a priest, I can desperate prayer, which I do here. If I was to get overlapped at this particular point, I would also have uh, my dwarf for the backstab, but we don't have it. Now, this is the particular part of the point of the pools of the dungeon, sorry, where Disc Priest doesn't need stone. You can actually fade past these mobs behind us, get up to the top, and grip someone up, which means that you don't need stone at all. But unfortunately, I don't know. The evoker rescues me up. I don't know why. Like you should rescue someone else up. And then my grip is on cooldown for another 10 seconds, and we're just sort of standing here, um, just sort of like wondering what's going on. Now, unfortunately, something happens to pull these two guys on the right. I don't know how, but these guys on the right do end up being pulled into our pack, which causes our only death for the dungeon. But it's a good bit of practice here as well, just to understand. What the damage profiles are of this dungeon surely by now. So although it sucks that there's going to be a lot of stuff and that could potentially kill you, you know, ultimately, like here we go, they've just added. Ultimately, you know what the spells they're going to do are. So have your spot heals and your ramp ready for things like the Buster, for example. There's also some targeted spell here. I don't know what it's called. Void Infusion, I think it's called, maybe. Um, you want to be trying to send some targeted heals for that. But unfortunately, we are front loading a lot of spells that we would have liked to have had for the boss. But on the other side, the pack lasts long enough that it sort of like evens back out and we're able to recover. Now, I think what was happening was we were skipping this pack with the intention of clearing this whole room, because, unfortunately, DKs and demon hunters and even orgs can accidentally pull the pack at the back with, pets or dots and eye beams and stuff. Yeah, here's the orgs died. It's just unfortunately I don't have anything else. My evangelism's on cooldown, my pain subs are on cooldown, my barriers on cooldown. I had no spot heals, I had no shields. My penances were both, on recharging. Unfortunately, I just ran out of throughput at this particular fight, but at this particular point in the fight. But again, this wasn't something that was supposed to happen. So for us to only lose one person here and not full wipe on a ninja pool was good in itself. You know, again, I just want to reinforce by saying you should at this point understand the damage profile of the dungeon. So don't panic. Even though that's not supposed to be here and it's kind of too much of a pull, yeah, just don't panic. Now, this particular part, I'm going to try and explain to everyone that's watching, whether you're a disc priest, whether you're just a healer, or you're a DPS or a tank. How disc priests currently work really relies on people being not. I'm not saying grouped up, but like it is detrimental when people are super spread out. You know, we've had radiance for as long as disc priests have been a thing, as far as I'm aware and can remember. Obviously, if you're targeting radiance on one person and they're in Narnia, then you're targeting what's supposed to be a group heal onto one person, and it's not. Then becomes super efficient. It's not very good single target heal. Obviously that's a thing that you should be aware of. But disc priests at the bottom of your talent tree. I can't remember what they've called it this season, but you've got the extra four talent points that you could spend. We get Master of the Darkness, which is basically an empowered power word shield, but also targets three people instead of a single person. Now, if you're standing in Narnia and I target and I have this proc, which I have no real control over, obviously I'm going to be sending shields no matter what. But if you're standing in Narnia and I send this shield on you, uh, and it doesn't cleave to other people, then that's like a huge chunk of my healing just lost. So I do try to ask people, where possible, to get knocked back to the door that leads to the final boss. I just suggest you be wary of where your position is. Now, thankfully, the augmentation understands that the disc priest has the prio and getting gripped to the middle because we're basically the most wheelchair here, which keeps our throughput up, which means we can stand still and spot heal if we need to. But it also means that we're in range of everyone else and we can get some decent cleaving from our shields and penances and our radiances. Now, what I like to do, you'll see here I've power potted. I power potted during the tentacles because, I didn't have too much throughput before that. Um, and I think the tentacles are what does the most damage particular in this particular boss fight. If you fall behind on the tentacles, you're gonna have no throughput for the intermission. Um, so like that's the one particular point that I'd use a power pot for. Again, these these mana breaks that you take will be the difference between you being allowed to use a mana pot and a power pot. And obviously, you being able to use a power pot means you've got more powerful throughput. If you're using a mana pot, then sure, hopefully shouldn't go out of mana, but you could potentially just not have enough throughput for a particular part of the fight, um, which ultimately you would need that for. Now, you need to be wary that this pack is still alive at the back. So you'll notice I tried to do like an aerial view and I tried to be facing a direction that's not the ads because I don't want to accidentally like tab target onto the pack at the back and penance them or shadow word pain them or something dumb like that. Pull the mobs and ultimately break the key. So I think that's a good habit for everyone to get into, not just like the disc priests, but you know be aware that that's alive. Try and face a different way, and you know, if you don't have the need for using a particular ability that might cause a ninja pull, then try to save it. but it's pretty much just rinse and repeat. We've got some good cooldowns that we can rotate for this boss. We've got, our barriers, our AMZs, our Zephyrs. We always try to fade this particular part with the tentacles, and we try to get as close to the middle as possible, but not too far that it's going to knock us in a direction that we don't want to go. We want to try and be consistently getting knocked towards this door. Thankfully, the evoker understood the assignment there. Now he gets sent out. It's time. It's 8:30. He goes out because he wants to respec. I don't know what evokers need for this last boss, but it's important to understand that it happens quite frequently. So just be wary that your org might be outside respecking and to not start this boss before they're here. But we've got loads of time. I think by the time the RP is over, it's like 7:30, which is just a huge chunk of time. And what we try to do here is, remind people that the org's outside. We'll go back, we'll grip them to us, excuse me. We'll grip them to us. But what we realistically want to be doing at this particular part of the dungeon is like pre-ramping. We want to have our radiance charges up. We want to have full stacks of wheel and woe. We want everyone with atonement on. And basically, we want to be going into the pool front loading. Now, you notice we sent both Zephyr and Dome. I mean, sure, that's a bit of overkill, but how Zephyr works on this particular fight is it's going to be back up for the next AoE anyway, so I don't mind it just being sent kind of liberally. And it's also the one particular point of the fight in which everyone's sort of like in range of Dome to get like the best value. Excuse me. Now, with this first part of the fight, like I say, we want to be front loading. So we've used our barrier. But once those sort of like defensive cooldowns are over, we'll go into evangelism. We're trying to, obviously keep people topped up with fully charged wheel and woe shields. Um, Now it is also possible that you could send PI on the pull here because it would be ready for the second intermission. However, on the particular fly, I felt like we were going to be fine. We were going to be fine without it. We'll go into this intermission with some like decent cooldowns. We send it onto the DK because it's got army, and we're just, obviously trying to put as much damage out as possible. But it is also important to remember that, once the phase is over, it knocks everyone back and it does a shitload of damage. So you want to try and have pre-loaded shields on everyone. You want to be pre-fading to mitigate as much of that because you don't want to be going into the start of the next phase with everyone on like 50%, 40% HP. Again, Dispriests need to be proactive. That is your strength. And, part of the proactiveness here is, keeping people pre-shielded. Now, it's important when you see things like this, like the darkness, or in this particular case, the anti-magic zone, that you try and stand in it. We want to get value of it. There's no reason for you to not stand in it for the most part. So try and help mitigate as much damage by making use of the tools that have been given to you. Um, but yeah, then it's pretty much just rinse and repeat. Front load the start of the boss fight and the phase changes. Keep the tank topped up as much as possible so that when Laura does do the tank buster, he's, hopefully got enough survivability combined with himself to not get one shot. Unfortunately, tanks in PuGs definitely aren't completely aware of how the tank buster works on this fight. So again, part of how you can mitigate that is just being proactive by keeping people as topped up and the tank as pre-shielded as possible because that extra half a second that you might give them to react might be, saving the key. It's here that unfortunately we didn't have PI for this particular ban phase. It's no big deal, but it is what it is. Again, we go into Zephyr, we've got Dome, we're front loading. Once these cooldowns are over, we'll go into Evangelism. We try to fade on cooldown as much as possible. And yeah, we're just preloading heals. I would like to see an evoker try the spatial. I can't remember what it's called, but it's the ability that allows healers to cast while walking, cast while moving. I think for a disc priest, particularly in like this particular setting, I think it might be helpful when you've got like all the area denials, but it's not like detrimental to not have it. I'd like to try it one time. But yeah, let's just rinse and repeat. This is GG now. We've closed enough of the voids that the everything's everything's pretty much self-sustainable. You'll notice like my mana's pretty low, but that's because I've been going like super offensive. Like with Laura, you can't really be greedy like with anything. You just have to send that throughput. You have to have that throughput because it will just get to a certain point where had you like here we're on the third phase change and my mana. I mean I've still got like 20% or whatever, but like I need to use as much mana as possible. Anyway, it works out for us. Sorry, I didn't really come into this with a script. I tried my best to explain, but that's Seat of the Triumvirate 21. We did it with just under 3 minutes spare and just one death, and the one death was caused because of a ninja pull. I hope anyone that watched this, whether you're a healer or a tank or a DPS or whatever, might have learned something a little bit more about how discs work. But yeah, good luck out there. I wish you all the best.